Welcome to Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. This is the podcast where we explore the people and stories that make up the tech and venture ecosystem. Don't forget to subscribe, like, rate, and share the podcast because it really helps us get the word out to more people who are curious about understanding even more about the world of venture capital. This season of Nothing Ventured is sponsored by Odin. Odin helps angels, VCs, and founders to raise and deploy capital seamlessly. You can structure your SPVs and now run your funds, handle capital calls, portfolio management more smoothly and easily in one place. Founders use Odin to raise their entire round in a few clicks by simply sending investors a link and receiving investments immediately. Odin works with over 5,000 investors and over 150 emerging fund managers and angel syndicates globally. Head to joinodin.com to learn more. That's joinodin.com. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Nothing Ventured podcast with me, Aarish Shah. Today, I was super excited to have with me in the studio Clara Armand-Delille. Clara is the founder of Third Eye Media, strategic communications, media relations, marketing and branding consultancy for startups, scale-ups, and VCs. She has consulted for clients such as Atomico Ventures, Wise, formerly TransferWise, football NFT platform So Rare, which she supported from a $4 million seed round announcement to a $680 million super round with SoftBank. Prior to founding Third Eye Media, Clara worked across startups like FinTech iZettle and funds like Excel Partners, as well as in corporations like Google, to set and deliver their communications, PR, and marketing strategy across Europe and beyond. In today's episode, we talked about distilling the thesis and getting your message out there. The fact that the novelty effect has gone, so how do you differentiate? You only launch once, the new YOLO. Celebrate the smaller milestones and how to bridge the language gap early. Let's get into it. Clara, great to have you in the studio with me today. For the audience, if you want to check out Clara's background, do have a look at the primer episode. We go into a whole bunch of detail around what she's done, what she's been up to, and what she does now at Third Eye Media. But for the meantime, Clara, thank you so much for joining me. It's really great to have you in the studio with me.
Thanks for inviting me in this morning.
No, it's been really fun so far. So let's dive straight in. You've worked across corporate, startups, and VC funds. I'd love to understand from your perspective the different ways in which each of those must approach their kind of media and PR strategy, because I would imagine that, you know, how you promote a VC fund is very different from how you promote a startup, and obviously corporates have, you know, far different sort of problems that they face, whether it's around governance, whether it's around, you know, their actions in the public, etc. So yeah, I'd love to get your take on kind of how that approach varies.
Sure. So I think one of the big differences between a corporate, and I would put the two startups and VCs momentarily in the same bag for the moment, is that as a corporate, you are actually trying to remain proactive. You're actually on the back foot because you're getting a lot of inbounds. If you're a Google or a Meta or an X, you know, you have journalists every day pinging you and basically trying to feed whatever news cycle is going on. It could be the European Commission hearing that's coming up, something rogue that was said by a marketing manager in one of your countries that's spilling over into the media.
So it's often reactive, I guess, right?
Yes. And so what you're trying to do as a PR person there is build campaigns and narratives that you can push out proactively to keep on top of the agenda, which is a lot of fun and which is great, but which is obviously very different from what you're going to do, for example, for an early stage startup. An early stage startup, usually, you know, with us, a lot of times they'll be breaking into the news for the first time. So we're building, you know, who are you? What are you for? Why should I care? Right? And articulating that in a really crisp way. Who are your competitors? You want the journalists and their audience to be able to immediately place you, situate you. What is your utility? Off the back of that, you want them to immediately understand how fast you're growing. You're a winning horse, I need to pay attention, right? So that's the challenge. You're breaking into the news and trying to generate the first ever footprint. For a VC, the challenges are slightly different. I see VC PR as, I see three main components there. The first one is the VC brand. right? So you're trying to, if you're an Excel or anyone else really, you're trying to build that brand and have that brand be recognized and resonate. Okay, I remember this is their investment thesis. This is where they're based, or this is where they invest, or they're really good in this category, etc. The second one, which feeds the branding, is partner PR, profiling. getting people on stage, getting them to be top of mind with a journalist. Oh yeah, remember this guy's brilliant on gaming. Something's happening with this Apple ranking of games. Let me go interview them. Let me go ask them, right? So if you're getting inbounds on a specific category for a partner, it means the job is being well done. The third part, and this one's quite fun and really helps hammer it home for the VCs, is portfolio PR. Yep. So you work with your VCs and say, okay, what are the big, really strategic investments you're doing? I get some of them, they're high risk, they're very early stage. You want to keep them a little bit undercover until maybe they start performing better because you're a little bit unsure, but you want to do this. But which are the ones that we're really sure about, or we kind of want to position ourselves on? AI, climate tech, things that we know are unquestionably growing categories. Yep. And we managed to elbow ourselves onto the table and invest there. So let's push this out. Let's make sure we've got a quote there that's quite insightful, that showcases what we're seeing in this startup and how well we understand the category and the ecosystem.
I think that's really interesting. I'm going to have to take this one offline with you because as you were talking through there, I was thinking about kind of my own business and how I would approach PR from our perspective. And actually, our successes is rarely about our success. It's about the success of the businesses that we work with. And actually, the strategy from my perspective would actually be how do we showcase those successes within those businesses? Yeah. And as you say, kind of piggyback off of those. And exactly to your point, at the end of the day, VCs are deploying capital. They're not actually building the business themselves. They are an avenue by which a business gets built. So again, their success is absolutely predicated on the success of their portfolio companies. Yeah. And one of the things we're going to talk about later is what does that mean in the current landscape? And I would also imagine you mentioned Axel, but I would also imagine that there is a very big difference for a first-time fund manager or an emerging fund manager, maybe going into fund 1, fund 2, versus an Excel, a Sequoia, et cetera, who are more established. And then, of course, you even have like middle tier where, here in the UK, I would think about Playfair Capital, Stride, Hoxton, all of whom have been on the podcast in the past. They are definitely challenger VCs in the sense that they aren't as established as an Excel or a Sequoia, but they are more established than a first-time fund manager.
Sure.
So it seems that would the strategy remain the same for all three of those, or would it be sort of slightly different?
No, I think it would differ for each one. I mean, first of all, some things to be said about the bigger VCs, like I feel, at least back in the day when I was in house, like you'd hear a lot that investments speak for themselves. And I think that's changed today. Everybody understands that you got to go out there, build your voice. I think one of the VCs that's more established and understood that very well, very early on is Index Ventures. They were always historically very good at articulating their investment thesis, showcasing the portfolio, and really articulating their kind of raison d'être through the partners and getting themselves out there. So I think, obviously, I mean, the better known you are, the easier it is to sell you on a panel, and et cetera. Yeah. The younger you are, the more work there is to the PR to sort of work with you to build that investment thesis and position you strategically on some categories.
This season of Nothing Ventured is proudly sponsored by Emerge One. Emerge One provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups and scale-ups. They work with businesses from C to Series B that have been backed by some of the UK, US, and Europe's best venture capital funds. They provide support from capital allocation and management, KPIs and reporting, fundraising support, financial modeling, investor relations, and investor management. Come check them out at emergeone.co.uk when you're scaling fast and have need of a CFO. Let's just touch base. Sorry, I mean, like we're going off topic to an extent, but like I think this is a super interesting point because you just talked about investment thesis. So, do you get involved with VCs as they develop that thesis? Are you inputting into that, or is it more kind of like how do we promote this in the right way?
It's more how do you articulate it.
Right.
And I will always look at it and advise from the point of view of the media. Okay, you're working, your investment thesis is early stage, and you're really looking at these 6 categories, or you're category agnostic, but you're investing actively in 3 categories that are very hot and sexy at the moment.
Sure.
Let's showcase those more. Okay. Do you see what I mean? So work from the point of view of the media to say, okay, what's newsworthy in everything you're telling me you're doing?
Yeah.
And we package that.
So why I kind of ask this question is obviously I speak to lots of VCs. I look at kind of what funds are doing. And when I go onto a lot of the websites, essentially I see the same thing, right? Which is we back extraordinary founders doing disruptive things in massive markets. I'm like, well, okay, but that doesn't really tell me about why you as a fund are investing in, what are you actually investing in? Why are you, and why should I come to you for capital? I think one of the things that's really important is, over the last 10 years, obviously, and certainly over the last 5 years, we've had a huge amount of capital just flowing into startups, right? From VCs. That's all pulled back. And therefore, I think there are two things. Firstly, how do startups differentiate, but also how does a VC differentiate, right? Because how does a VC attract a startup? Why should a startup come and take capital from you? Like that hot startup, why should it come to you rather than going to, say, an Index or a Sequoia or an Accel or whoever it might be? Like how when you're kind of promoting that thesis, how do you get that kind of message across?
That's a really good question. And to be honest, a lot of times, again, the DNA of Third Eye Media, I consider us more doers than, just thinkers. And I don't like...
You're not brand strategists as such, right?
No, yeah. I want to execute. And so if I see, for example, as you're saying, that maybe the VC's tagline is quite generic, I'm not going to start fighting against that and try to herd cats with sort of 9 partners who've had that tagline for 8 years and don't want to change it.
Sure.
What I'll do is try and distill what's in there that can give us an edge. And one example is like I'm working with a VC that, invests in all sorts of categories. But we noticed, and they even mentioned to me, we're quite strong in AI. And so we'll go there and say, look, this is their track record. They've just put $6 million in this AI company. They've got 3 others. Like, should we put them on a panel on AI? Do you want an opinion piece on AI and ethics? Because they got a lot to say. Do you see what I mean? And we've got that track record. So we're just distilling what's newsworthy and what can be packaged into this topic or narrative and pushing that out.
Yeah, I think that's really... I think that's really interesting because it's about finding, to your point, those outlier, almost like, what are the things that you can be known for rather than what do you want to be known for? Like, how do you prove that you are like, there are some funds obviously that are very clearly, we invest in AI or we invest in B2B or we invest in whatever, right? So if I think about Notion, Dawn, they are very clearly B2B software, enterprise software.
Yeah.
That message can be a lot easier, right? But I think there are generalist funds, especially where that message can become quite diluted, right? Unless you focus on, okay, well, actually out of that portfolio of 10, 15, 20 companies, whatever it might be, let's pick the really interesting ones and figure out how like why you are adding value in those, right?
100%. And I think for me, the point of entry to find that is stages.
Yeah.
Or categories. So you see, I'm looking horizontally and I'm looking vertically. I'm like, what can I grab onto and, sort of plot that into a journalist inbox?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a huge amount of sense. So moving on, I often get worried, and I think this is the other side, right? So I get worried when I see startups, especially startups, constantly in the press, right? Because I wonder if they're spending their dollars on trying to drum up PR rather than actually executing, right? And it speaks of a time where you could raise, multiple rounds of capital on tap and throw them into marketing, right? And obviously PR is a big part of that. So in today's world where, it's harder to get funding, it's tighter, there's scrutiny on sustainable growth. Like, what advice do you have for startups who are trying to figure out their PR strategy in that way, right? Because I think there is, there are problems with over-indexing towards PR, right? But there's also a problem with not doing any PR whatsoever.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And earlier on, we were talking about, at least this is a trend that I'm observing in my own profession, that I feel like actors in the ecosystem and startups in particular are starting to understand PR better. And this is great because back in the day, you'd have startups come to you with news that was already out on their social channels and ask you to pitch it to journalists, but the novelty effect is gone and things like that. So I think, I still do some trainings for early stage startups. And one of the things that I try to do to draw attention from these startups is to tell them, in the world of PR, it's YOLO. You only launch once. And the first time you push yourself out, like, invest in it. Hire a professional if you need to. If you don't know what you're doing, if you've never written a press release, but you approximately think you know how to write one, literally speak to someone, hire them for a couple hours, have them do the job right, introduce you to the media in the proper way, right? So I think that's one thing to be said that's quite important. The first time that you present yourself out there, that you push yourself out there, generate a quality footprint, do it the right way. About your point about, doing it too much, in a way, I almost see that as a good sign. I think, again, it's like maybe that pendulum that, overbalance it, like swings too much on one side.
I think part of that is my own kind of British slight sort of reservation, right? Why are you in the press? Like,
stop the headlines.
Like, and to be fair, like, again, I also am someone that over time is just like, when I see the TechCrunch articles, I'm just like, oh, geez, not another one. Like, and I think that may be also just because I'm in this sector, in this space, that I'm seeing all of this.
You're seeing
it
a lot. Yeah, that's true. I mean, look, I think, a couple golden rules with reporters, like, don't harass a reporter if you don't have news. So again, like, if you do have news, make sure you're packaging it well and hire somebody to help if that's needed, right? So don't harass a reporter if you don't have news. But there are ways, and this is what's fun working with startups, where we have a bit of a pioneering role of like breaking them into the media. There are ways of securing coverage for startups when they don't have anything to announce. And one of them is, doing bylines, right? So generating opinion pieces, like you're an AI startup, or you're, a climate tech startup working on sustainability. You're sitting on so much info that, we don't know about. So your opinion is going to be very sophisticated about your industry. So if we can articulate that into opinion pieces, like, where do you see your industry going in 5 years? Or what should be keeping you up at night? If you're non-sustainable and we're climate tech people coming at you, like, what are the things that these big corporates that we're disrupting should be doing? Is
Just Stop Oil a help or a hindrance towards your kind of green strategy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Things like that. The other thing you can do is, grab onto smaller milestones that might not be, might not deserve a whole press release, but are still newsworthy. And if you started to build a relationship with a reporter around, for example, the last press release you did with a funding announcement or launching in a new market, and they wrote all about you, and then you're like, hey, remember us from 6 months ago? We've just literally signed this big fat partnership with a bank or whoever it is. And then they might want to do a sit down with you. You can give them that as an exclusive, for example. That's another strategy you can use.
And actually, just whilst you were saying that, I was just thinking, right, when I think about what is the right channel, who is the right press, right? So if I think about, tech press, it's like, certainly here in Europe, you've got tech.eu, you've got UK TN, you have obviously Sifted, Financial Times to some extent, and a couple of others that are very, very well known. TechCrunch obviously being
and EU startups as well.
EU startups, etc. Right? Is there a challenge? Because I know a few of the journalists there, right? But very hard. Like, when they want something, they come at me. If they don't want anything, they don't. But in fact, I think I've been trying to get someone from tech.eu onto the podcast for a little while. But I wonder whether there is almost like an oversaturation of press in the tech. Like, so, when you see, let's say, a funding announcement, it gets announced across all of those platforms. It's like essentially the same press release. I get that would make sense, but is there almost, are there too many of those outlets so that actually there's nothing differentiated? Or do you think that enough people look at each of those that actually that broader coverage makes sense? I
think the broader coverage makes sense for the simple reason that it will generate a longer lasting footprint for you in the media. You've got to remember SEO when you're doing PR today, right? Sure. That's essential. The other thing is that each of these outlets, it really has built a brand and has their own personality. If you look at the tech.eu articles, they tend to be slightly more succinct, very systematic, but they also for a long time had an audio podcast. Now they've launched a video podcast, right? So they've really built their personality. Also, they merged with Webrazi.
Oh, okay.
The Turkish-based publishing group.
Interesting.
So there's been that merger, and the group has grown, right? So they have more capability, more coverage. If you look at something like EU startups, it's the same. They do roundups of different countries and regions in Europe. So they're very pro-Europe, and they'll do a deep dive into Lithuania or Croatia or Italian tech. Or do you see what I mean? So again, it's like it's nice to get that footprint. You've even got smaller outlets like Startup Reporter, or Stardust.cc. etc., that sometimes pick up the news and are helpful. Another one that I want to mention that I think is really helpful for funding announcements, because their readership has grown a lot because of how reliable they are, is Fin SMEs, which I'm sure you know. But they've got great readership and they've got really good SEO.
Amazing. I mean, I in fact, I haven't come across Fin SMEs, and I will have a look at them.
Yeah.
But how would you think about then, for example, the kind of proliferation now of, the Beehive and the Substack kind of solo journalists, right? So you've got some really big ones in the US, like Eric Newcomer and those sort of guys. Like, how has that changed also, the way that you would approach kind of who you approach for those sort of
I feel like with newsletters, and I hope I don't make enemies with this, I feel like it's all or nothing. Like some of them are absolutely vital. Like Strictly VC from Connie Loizos is amazing, right? Connie is like a very senior reporter at TechCrunch, and she started Strictly VC, I think maybe close to 10 years ago. Super well read, like very authoritative, obviously Fortune term sheet, pitch book. You want to be in there, right? And then some of them are much smaller, and it's kind of hit or miss. I mean, I will definitely send, AI related information to like 15 or 20 AI newsletters, but I never know if they're going to cover me, right?
Got it.
And if they do, you're relying on readership that's literally signed up to it. Again, we're back into SEO issues. Like you're not very visible online. So unless people signed up to you, it won't be seen. But it will be seen by the specialists that are interested in the topic, right?
Yeah, because they're doing the research all the time. They're looking out for that news, so they're probably more likely to look at those newsletters. I guess the other point there is, I mean, I write my own newsletter, very small readership at the moment, but we'll see where that goes. But, part of the problem is, as a consumer of newsletters, I don't have the time, right? So what I end up doing is subscribing to a bunch, which I'm really enthusiastic about because I can see that the writing's really great. And then like 3 weeks in, a month in, I'm like, unsubscribe. Not because I don't think that the content's valuable. It's just I know I'm never going to get around to reading them, right? And I think that is actually the challenge today. And again, it comes back to that point about, is there just too much, right, news and information out there? In fact, I think one of the publications that I know a lot of VCs, certainly here in the UK, and I think probably in the US, look at is The Information, which again, high quality content, but again, so much of it. And unless your job is literally to sit there and look at that stuff, I guess for the wider population, it can be quite sort of not daunting, but maybe overwhelming to have, that volume of news and information coming at you.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. But again, for anyone in the industry, like people listening to your podcast, all the guests that are here, do you know what I mean? Like that's pretty vital. For example, I would never skip, and I don't skip the VC newsletters. Why? Because what I'm getting out of it is the daily temperature.
Interesting.
The weekly temperature. Like it becomes over time, you just glance through it and you're like, okay, how many funding announcements today? Okay, it's picking up again. Yeah. Or it's gone down, or this isn't as hot. Like in the back of your head, you get this like kind of at scale understanding of trends. Yeah.
No, I think that's really important. It's that kind of trends. I think the reason I struggle with it is I mean, I think I've recently mentioned quite a few times, but pretty sure I'm sort of slightly ADHD, and therefore when I read, I can't skim. I mean, I can skim, but I'm really bad at not just at really just skimming, taking the content and moving on. I feel like I'm doing it a disservice if I don't read in detail every single word that's on the page. And I think that's a personal issue of mine rather than kind of a broader trend. But I completely get what you're saying.
But is it a personal issue? Like this brings on something really interesting about how you present the information.
Yeah.
And for example, with years of experience of writing press releases and stuff, or writing a pitch that's followed by a press release for a reporter, like our job is to extract the information and put it in a presentable way so that you can glance through it even though you're not a glancer. Yeah. So we'll have like a headline and then we'll have like subheaders that immediately extract the numbers that mean you should care about this press release over another one, for example.
And I think Tech EU does quite a good job. Like they use quite interesting, great fonts, underlining. Like it's actually very easily skimmable. I mean, I guess from the flip side, as someone who's trying to write a lot more than normal than I normally would. I have that same problem in the sense that I think the newsletter I released on Tuesday was probably 4,500 words long, which is just, I know it's too much, right? I know it's way too much. And if it is condensed and text heavy, then it becomes really hard to read and skim through, as you say. So, there is this kind of point of less is more, and how do you actually, streamline those sort of things. But look, allied with what we were talking about earlier, and you just mentioned as well, like, in your recent article on EU startups, you talked about the art of guest posting, right? So you discussed developing the voice and face of a startup. Could you kind of take us through or elaborate on the importance of that content strategy for startups and how they can leverage guest posting to build their brand? Because I think that's something that I think probably a lot of startups don't think about. It's either we get a press release or nothing, right?
Yeah, again, so that's part of educating people about what PR is. And we're getting better, but we're not 100% there. Guest posts are great because they are sort of an easy and impactful way of continuing to sustain and secure a footprint when you don't have anything to announce.
Yeah.
Which, let's be honest, is the vast majority of the time when you're a startup, right? Like if you're Google, you're launching products or you've got updates every day or whatever. But if you're a small startup, you might launch, out of beta, and that's it. It's your entire product that's just been launched, and then you're trying to grow it, etc. And you can go months or years without having anything else to say. Or a partnership comes up, but it's like 12 months later or 18 months later, etc. So in the meantime, you do your splash in the media. Let's say you're coming out in the media with that launching out of beta or funding announcement. And then what do? You go silent. Yeah. Well, guest posts are a great way to showcase your understanding of the industry you're in and sustaining that footprint. People often think about, okay, let me do a blog post, but if what you're saying is really relevant and newsworthy, like rather than putting it in your channels where you're depending on people coming and visiting your website,
and half the time you get, I mean, like I have a 15,000 following on LinkedIn, but I can tell you, like, it is very hard to get eyeballs, either on the podcast or of the newsletter just by posting organically on LinkedIn. Like, and if anything, LinkedIn and Twitter to some extent now punish those external links. So actually it becomes really hard for people to digest what you're talking about unless you are literally organically kind of just posting some content, so user generated. Whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, with guest posts, it's not an or, it's really an and. Like place it in the media and then put it on your Medium, put it on your blog posts, make it, another post of yours as an author on LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. Do you see what I mean? So, and then retweet it and show that you were published somewhere. Whatever you said has been deemed newsworthy.
So I did that because I was quite prolific on Medium for a while, and I got published in a few of the kind of back when they were still like. So I think I used to write poetry on Medium, and I got like 4,700 odd followers. But I also then started writing some startup related stuff, and that got published in a couple of the publications there.
Right.
And then I sort of stopped because Medium went through like all these various changes, and it just became a little bit overwhelming. But absolutely right. It's that social proof, right? Like, okay, I've been featured in X. Therefore, if you want to learn about this topic, or if you are looking for a subject matter expert on this particular issue, then here's some social proof that I'm the right person to do that, right?
100%. It's that authoritativeness that you get from the press that you just don't get from, posting on your own channels.
Yeah. So I think that actually leads us very nicely into kind of my final question, which is, in a world that is always online, right? And where content has become just ubiquitous, where every VC is on Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok, how do you think funds should approach PR to ensure that they are the first port of call when exciting companies are raising around?
That's a very good question, which we touched upon partially when I was saying that I see three big buckets of PR activities for VCs. But I agree with you that it is a struggle for VCs to differentiate. To articulate an investment thesis that's really unique. And the reality is, and again, maybe a little bit controversial, but we're seeing a big correction in the market. As we were saying earlier, less funds are raising because it's a more challenging environment. So I think that, the actors that will kind of weather this storm are people who really do have a unique approach to the market and are adding value. There's been a lot of claims of like, we're not just money, we're smart money. And you scratch behind that, you're like, okay, so you're writing a check and then what else?
Yeah.
Right? There's also big debates in Europe, and we've seen it. And I've even been, I've even worked with with some VCs that were literally involved in these debates about, scaling. Is there enough follow-on money that's actually smart money? Like
in Europe, almost all my guests would say no, there isn't. But yeah,
that's the thing, right? Because there isn't a culture here of repeat entrepreneurship. As much as there is in the US. And like, I hate to say it, but in the US, you'll build a company, sell it, and keep at it. In Europe, you'll build a company, sell it, and buy a yacht and retire in Saint-Tropez. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, that sounds like fun, to be honest. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. But it's, I think that's it's a really interesting point. I mean, I recorded with Antonio Avitabile just a couple of weeks ago. He's the managing director Europe for Sony Ventures Corporation. I am going to be recording with actually someone I think you introduced me to, Massimiliano Magrini. And we had like some really strong conversation. I have an affinity with Italy, as you know. My wife is Italian, etc. And I've always had this kind of weird thinking, well, not weird thinking, but I've always not understood why, Italy being the birthplace of private equity, as it were, why we don't see much either much capital or much entrepreneurship in Italy. And actually, Massimiliano and Antonio talked about it from not just Italy, but from a wider European perspective. And one of the things that one of them said, and I think both of them agreed with, that really stuck out, is that in Europe, we do not have scale-up CEOs. We don't have entrepreneurs that know how to do the big thing, because we haven't had any of those big things here.
Not enough of them.
And you touched on this as well when you talked about, in 2011, Axel, etc. It was the
first big wave.
It was the first big wave, right? Now that is 30, 40 years behind where the US is, right? So
absolutely,
we're playing catch up, but equally we don't have the cultural, I guess, affinity. And 100% you're right. I think there are two factors that play into that. Yes, I think founders that exit here, yes, much more likely to, I don't think it's categorically always the case, but I think much more likely to say, okay, I'm retiring and I'm kind of moving on and doing my own thing, and often getting into philanthropy and other stuff like that, maybe into angel investing or setting up a fund potentially. But the problem is twofold. It's like we don't have those incredible repeat founders that recycle through the ecosystem, but Europe as a whole is also too fragmented, right? Like there's this issue that in order to really scale, you have to go to the US because it's a bigger place. And I guess, I mean, there's a question in here somewhere. Like one of the things I think about is, well, how do you actually scale from Europe to the US, right? So as an example, you may be massive in Europe, but in the US, you're nobody, right? So how do you think about that from a PR perspective as well?
Very good question. From a PR perspective, I think about it with bridging the linguistic gap early. If you're a continental startup, get your news out in English ASAP. And frankly, that YOLO, if you only launch once, like make that bilingual if you're an Italian startup, if you're a Spanish startup, you're French, German, right? So bridge the linguistic gap early. And the other thing we do at Third Eye Media is we immediately push that story out on both sides of the continent. We were talking earlier about US-based VC newsletters. Well, you're newsworthy to them with your very first funding announcement, even if you're in Madrid or, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that is the way to get on the map. And then from there, you start getting feedback from the market, what's interesting to US reporters, et cetera, and you can start building the story from there. Obviously, we are only, as PR people, a reflection of the business. So there's business-driven objectives. Are you going to launch an office? Is the share of US growing? Is there something we can say that's got a US angle?
Have you entered the market? Have you captured some of the market? Has one of your competitors in the US like struggled or had success that you can then say, well, they've been amazing and we're now launching and we're going to compete against them, right? Because I think there is also that angle around that competitive tension, right? Because obviously there are no businesses that are so unique that they are the only people doing that one thing. So you almost kind of have to ride on the success and failures of your competitors, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing about sort of conquering new markets with PR is that, oftentimes we'll be asked by a client like, oh, well, we're French and, Germany is the next market we want to go into. Can we just do our release in German? And I'm like, but you've got no angle.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Culturally, it's different as well, right?
But also, if you don't have an angle, like that German reporter at Deutsche Startups or Wirtschaftswoche or whatever is writing about stuff happening in the German market. If you're if you want to be in the German market, then we need a story to tell that's already German.
Yeah.
Where you can pave the way, that would be social media or paid articles.
That's interesting. And I guess that comes back to what it is that you're trying to achieve, both as a business as well as in terms of your PR, right? Like I and you and I have talked about this as well, right? Like, for me, it would make no sense to do a European launch because when we don't have a European presence, right? Like there'd be nothing to talk about. Like, and I think probably I would imagine some founders can make that mistake of saying, well, we're big here, therefore that's news there, when actually it's not.
Exactly. And again, because we tend to forget, yes, it is a very fragmented market. Like Italians are reading Italian news in Italian language. La Repubblica,
and about football, yeah.
Yes, also. La Repubblica is not going to write about, UK-based Emerge One with, UK clients.
Yeah.
Unless you go and sign up Unicredito or something big happens in Italy, and then there's a very strong Italian angle. And so that would be a great opportunity to do a new market launch in Italy for you.
Amazing. So, Clara, just to wrap up, I guess one final question, if I could, is what is the one piece of advice, like for a startup, a VC, whoever it might be, who has not got a PR strategy in place yet, is trying to figure out what they should do as a first step? What would be that first step?
A couple tips there. First of all, create news alerts of your competitors to understand what's being said in the media by people who are similar to you. And I know you might say you don't have competition. You always do. They're either traditional or you got digital competitors or other funds that are kind of in the same turf as you, etc. So create alerts there. You can go do, google.com/alerts and then put in keywords. That is very helpful to understand. And from there, if you're not an expert, ask questions. It's better to ask questions too early. Take a call with somebody that's too early and they're like, oh, come back in 6 months when you've signed this deal or when the term sheet is, already signed or whatever it is. But I think, my job as a PR is still to continue to bridge that knowledge gap and understanding of how the media works. So like the earlier you can start asking the questions and do some fact finding about that, the better.
Yeah. And just one, I guess, question that kind of flows from there is, should startups be reaching out to news outlets directly, or is it always better to use obviously, I guess, your answer will be, it's better to use someone that has a
not
feeling
necessarily.
For the scape, but how does that work? Because I would imagine that a lot of these journalists, to your earlier point, like are getting flooded with, hey, we've got this news and it's not really news. How should they think about that?
Look, if somebody in your team has run a marketing function before and worked with PRs and, written or signed off dozens of press releases, drafted pitches, etc. Like they're perfectly equipped to, kind of bootstrap the PR function until they get bigger and they're like, okay, this is becoming a full-time job. It's unmanageable. Let me get a PR agency or somebody to head up our, our communication strategy here, right? Yeah. It's all about whether you have experience doing it or not. PR is common sense, but up until you've seen how it's done, there is a methodology there, and you don't want to sort of, fry your opportunity to get the attention of the right reporters.
For sure. And I think as with everything in the VC kind of ecosystem, there is a huge amount of relationship driven sort of activity as well, right?
There really is.
So understanding how to maneuver that and how to kind of work within that ecosystem is really important. Clara, it's been so great having you here in the studio with me. Thank you so much for joining me. For our audience and our listeners, where's the best place for them to find you online? Are you on Twitter? Are you on LinkedIn? Where should they look for you online?
Well, the best way is really to email me, clara@thirdeyemedia.press. We have a website that's thirdeyemedia.press. And otherwise, we've got professional channels as well. So you can find me on Instagram, on Twitter. But the best way is email.
Amazing. Clara, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.